Welcome to the channel, everybody. In this video, we're going to be learning about boom. We're going to be learning about boom. And a few of these. Boom, 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 boom. And what does that result in? Ooh. Look at the chest. Look at the chest. Look at the biceps. Look at the triceps. Ooh, how good is that? Why am I standing in the middle of these two legends, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Lou Ferrigno? Why are we all posing? Why are we all showing off that definition? Why is it that we go to the gym and we talk about the gains? And the gains, and the gains, and we're talking about the proteins, and the fats, and the carbohydrates. And why do we take these nutrients? Because we want the bigger squats, and the bigger deadlifts, and we want to pick up girls on our backs. And why? Because it looks damn sexy. And as we're walking down the beaches and all the women are looking and they're saying, God damn, you have great pecs. Look at the size of them biceps. And why do we do all of this pain? Well, it's because we're part of the history of bodybuilding. Thank you for watching that insane introduction. Now let's get started with the history of bodybuilding. And in fact, we have to go all the way back to ancient Greece. Now the Greeks had a real fascination when it came to the human anatomy. They loved the idea of the muscles and the bones and the joints and the ligaments and the blood vessels and all these things put together to create wonderful physiques. And in fact, they created the Olympic Games. Now they didn't just do this so that people could show off their athletic ability. They did it so that people could show off their bodies. So if you look at a lot of the events like wrestling, not only are you doing the wrestling event, but you're also showing off the muscles and how the body actually works. When we look at stone lifting, yes, they are picking up stones and competing with each other, but you get to see the body work and how your body can lift up heavy weights. When people were swimming, you could see how the body reacts in water. So the Olympic Games wasn't just a show of force or physical ability. It was also to show off the extremes of the human body. Now, in the year 394, the Romans come along and they decide that they're going to get rid of the original Olympic Games. Now, that might surprise you because the Romans often adopted a lot of Greek culture into their culture. So you would think, why would the Romans not want the Greek Olympic Games and simply just call it the Roman Olympic Games? Well, the reason being is that the Romans, they did appreciate the human body, but they wanted to use it for a different reason. Instead of doing recreational sports and showing off the body, the Romans wanted the body for the military. So what we find during the Roman period is that a lot of the physical activities that Romans do is all leading to the military. So anything such as lifting weights, lifting stones, doing press-ups, doing squats, it's not for audiences. It's not because you're competing against other athletes. It's because you're competing against other soldiers so that you can become part of the legionaries that are then sent out there to defend the borders of the Roman Empire. It's not that the Romans don't like recreational activity, it's that the military always comes first. For the next 1,500 years, the Olympic Games ceases to exist, and it doesn't re-emerge until 1896. Now, at this part in history, we have to introduce you to the father of modern-day bodybuilding, Eugen Sandow. Now, Eugen is a German living in London, and he travels around London performing various strength shows. And these shows are not only to show his body, but to show his body whilst lifting heavy weights. Now, these shows are wildly popular, and the reason being is because most Londoners look like this at the turn of the century, but Eugen Sandow looks like this. So he is a goddamn freak of nature, and every show the crowds get bigger and bigger. And in fact, by the time we get to the 14th of September 1901, they are so popular that Eugen Sandow puts on what we know as the Great Competition. Now, this is hosted by the Royal Albert Hall in London, and it is a massive exhibition of strongmen, and it is hosted by Eugen Sandow. And in fact, once the competition is all complete, the trophies are handed out, and guess what? The trophies are modelled on Mr. Sandow himself. So we have the gold Sandow,
the silver sando and the bronze sando. Now, out of all the trophies that are handed out, it is the bronze one that ultimately becomes the more famous one. And in fact, it is so famous that as the years go by after the competition, some of the richest people in the country start to create their own replicas so that they can keep a little bit of that history for themselves. In 1950, Steve Reeves wins the National Amateur Bodybuilding Association's Mr. Universe competition. And to celebrate this being the 50th anniversary of the original competition, Steve is given a bronze statue of Yugen Sando. Now, in 1977, an athlete known as Frank Zane wins the International Federation Bodybuilders Mr. Olympia competition, and he is given a replica of the bronze Yugen Sando statue. Now, 77 is important because from 77 all the way to the present day, everybody who wins the Mr. Olympia competition gets the bronze Yugen Sando trophy. As the shows in London have been hugely successful, we then start to see weightlifting move to the United States, and it first hits the shores of the States between the 28th of December 1903 and the 2nd of January 1904, when in Madison Square Gardens in New York City they host their very first large-scale weightlifting competition. Between the years 1900 and 1930, this is where we start to see more people really interested in weightlifting and then subsequently bodybuilding. So an individual like Earl Lederman, he writes a lot of books about bodybuilding and how the body reacts to lifting heavy weights over short periods of time and long periods of time. The people on the screen as well, they're also contributed towards how the body should look whilst on stage. So when the athletes stand on stage and they give you these various different looks, well, these individuals contributed towards them poses. So these were really fascinated in how to enhance the body's look whilst in front of an audience. By the time we get to the 1950s and 1960s, this is where a lot of magazines and a lot of these men's health programs start to hit the masses. So we find that people are now more interested in nutrition and dieting and bulking up and cutting down, and all these various different weightlifting and dietary programs are now being introduced to the masses. During this same period of time, we start to see more bodybuilding organisations be established. So we have the National Amateur Bodybuilding Association, we have the International Federation for Bodybuilders, which by the way was founded by the Wade brothers, and we also have the World Bodybuilding Guide, plus many, many more. Now, as well as having all these organisations, we also have many Mr. competitions. So you have the local regional ones, such as Mr. London or Mr. New York. You have the larger ones, maybe like Mr. England or Mr. New York State, and then you have the really big ones such as Mr. America, Mr. Universe, and the ultimate one, Mr. Olympia. During the 1960s, a lot of men had a real fascination with these big sexy bodies, but there was one problem: they couldn't get them themselves. Now the reason for this is because in America and in Britain, a lot of the gyms look like this. And of course, they don't have a lot of equipment, but most importantly, they don't have specialised equipment. Let me explain. Look at these bodybuilders' legs. You can see the different muscles within there. Now, you can't create them legs on one exercise. You might need 6 or 7 different exercises. You might even need 8. Look at the size of them things. Now, most gyms in the 60s didn't have 6 or 7 different exercises for one body part. So most men couldn't get these results. So here's where we need to introduce one of the most famous gyms in history, and that is Gold's Gym. So Gold's Gym first opened in California in America, and it was a huge success. In fact, Gold's and Arnold Schwarzenegger basically go hand in hand. And one of the reasons being is because the location was fabulous, the equipment was even better. Imagine this, you're in the gym and you're working on a variety of exercises that works every muscle in a variety of different ways. Then once you've finished your hot, sweaty workout, you then walk out of the gym, and what meets you? Beautiful hot sun, beautiful beaches, and what's more beautiful than that? The women. They were everywhere in California. And this is why the location and the equipment, and then Arnold Schwarzenegger using the facilities, made Gold's Gym a world famous brand. As we move into the 1970s, we now need to introduce you to the next generation of bodybuilders. We have Arnold Schwarzenegger, we have Lou Ferrigno, we have Franco Columbu, and many, many more. Now at this point, we need to remember that bodybuilding is quite small. If you compare it to all the other sports like American football and baseball, or football and cricket and rugby, these are large sports that are followed by millions of people, whereas bodybuilding is relatively small. But that is about to change. Bodybuilding is going global. And why? It's all down to the 1977 documentary known as Pumping Iron. Now this is fabulous, this documentary, because it shows you the training and preparation for the 1975 Mr. Olympia competition. And we see it from 2 points of view. You have Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's training at the Gold's Gym in California. Everything around him is bright, colourful and wonderful. The men that surround him are really big and beautiful. Everybody is lifting lots of heavy weights. When they step outside the gym, you have the beautiful sun, you have the golden beaches, and the women look fabulous. The opposite to that is Lou Ferrigno. He is training in a gym in New York City, and the gym appears to be in some kind of basement or really dark, dingy gym. And all the weights are rattling, all the plates are shaking, and in the background, he's not surrounded by big sexy men. He's surrounded by normal skinny men. And it kind of gives you the impression that he is the only serious lifter in a gym full of ordinary people. In fact, there's one guy in the background who's got quite a large belly, and he's simply standing there doing a bicep curl. He doesn't want to be there. And yet Lou Ferrigno has to motivate himself while surrounded by people that are clearly not that motivated. So you get a contrast in how they prepare for the Mr. Olympia competition. Now, of course, if you look at the cover, Arnold's on the cover, so he wins the Mr. Olympia competition. But the whole documentary gives the average person an insight into the diet, the training, the mindset, and everything that is involved in the Mr. Olympia bodybuilding competition. Throughout the 1980s, the main organisation looking over all of bodybuilding is the International Federation for Bodybuilders. They oversee all the competitions. And one of the problems that they face is this big problem known as steroids. Now, steroids is an awkward situation, because if you want the fairness of competition, but then people are taking enhancing drugs, how does that work? If you're a sprinter, a basketball player, a footballer, a rugby player, an anything player, and you take steroids that enhances your body, then the chances are you're going to be banned from doing that sport. But yet in bodybuilding, it's essential to take if you want to look like these gentlemen on the screen. So how does that work? And in fact, one of the best examples is Ronnie Coleman. So Ronnie Coleman is an 8-time Mr. Olympia bodybuilder, one of the best in the industry. And in fact, he started bodybuilding as a natural lifter. And when he gets to the big competitions, he looks around and he realizes he has no chance of winning if he doesn't take the juice. So what does he do? He starts taking steroids and he gets bigger and bigger. Well, it looks like that. He's absolutely huge. He's a monster. But he is one of the most successful in the industry. But of course, he only gets this way by taking a steroid, an enhancing drug. So, of course, this is one of the problems that bodybuilding now sees through the 80s, and then we're going into the early 90s. And this brings us nicely onto the next topic, which is in 1991, the World Wrestling Federation owner, Vince McMahon, he decides to create the World Bodybuilding Federation. He's going to take wrestling and bodybuilding, put them together and market them around the world. But he has the same problem, steroids, enhancing drugs, and it hits him in 2 parts. So over in bodybuilding, how can you advertise bodybuilding to the masses if you're telling people that the only way you can be good at this sport is by taking steroids? It's not really a good look. But also over in wrestling, a lot of the wrestlers are found in many scandals to be taking steroids. So if that's been marketed as a sport, and especially to children, how can you advertise these wonderful wrestlers if they're all juicing up in the background? And what we find is that Vince ends up in the courtrooms quite a lot, defending himself and his two federations. And ultimately it becomes too much because he decides to get rid of the World Bodybuilding Federation once and for all. During the 1990s, we see the fall of the Soviet Union and ultimately the end of the Cold War. Now, one thing that we find is that a lot of people within the Soviet Union had a real fascination with bodybuilding. And in fact, they did it quite a lot. They had their own leagues and their own federations. It's just that because the world was split in two, we often didn't see that side of the world. But what we know is that when the fall of the Soviet Union happens and all them countries become independent, we see a new generation of bodybuilders emerge on the world stage. Now, for me, that is fantastic, getting more people included. But I'm going to have to finish this story on a negative, because in the year 2000, we tried to introduce bodybuilding to the modern day Olympics. And unfortunately, it was refused. I mean, what a sad way to end it. It started with the ancient Greek Olympics, but we can't even get it in the modern day Olympics. I mean, what a bummer is that? So there we are, everybody. That is the history of bodybuilding. And we got to see some big flexing in this video, which was great. So if you enjoyed what you saw, please like and subscribe to the channel. And I wish you all an amazing day.